So let me start by thanking Dan and certainly his assistants who've done so much to make us welcome. Thank you so much. And thank you to Mick and Dan and Laura for the initiative to do a volume on painting as model. I'll come back to that in a minute.
Okay. ReModel.
No, we'll come. This is my question in a minute. Okay. But let me start by suggesting that the initiative to try and read Yve-Alain's book today, to look at its contemporary relevance, will probably end up in failure. And it was my fault. And it was Yve-Alain himself who said that it will probably be a failure.
That's it, then?
Yeah. Oh. And in the Mick mentioned that the book was first published in French only last year, and there's a small postface that you write for the book in French, and you yourself say, in response to an editor who says, could you please talk about the current
Well, the editor wanted me to update the preface.
The preface. And ask about its contemporary relevance. No. And you said, no. And you said that it will probably end in failure at some stage. And I think that's a useful way to start, to think about why this initiative, which is so important, could potentially end in a certain type of failure. And let me, there's a small quotation which I'll start with and maybe you can respond to. You said, this failure made me understand that the text's very historicity, the fact that it was written quarter of a century ago, is perhaps why it is still readable, both as a dated document, a document from a certain epoch, as it were, and as a symptom of the conditions of possibility of a quite specific moment within the history of the human sciences, and particularly the history of art. And it's a striking claim, because it tries to situate, it acknowledges the book could be situated, its historicity could be situated at a certain moment, but that you in some sense refuse to look at its contemporary implications. Could you talk about that?
Well, it was very striking. I tried. I mean, I thought it's, editor wants to have an updated preface which makes sense, So I did try. And in trying to update this preface, which was very polemical at the time, called, Resisting Blackmail, I realized that, first of all, there was almost no blackmail anymore, and that, or if there is, it has changed in it's very different type. And many of the polemics that were making it interesting to be an art historian at the time, because you could just play boxing, had kind of disappeared, and we were much more kind of soft, soft invasion of everything. So I just could not, and I realized, well, actually, it would be better if it's kept exactly as is, as a kind of, document of the time. But the postface is actually a history of what has changed since then. And the postface was not written for the book. It was a very bizarre thing. I was asked to, it was published as a postface of the book, but it was not written for it. I was asked to do to participate in a symposium in Nanterre, a 3 or 4 day or 5 day symposium, a torture absolute, 5 day symposium, which I went only for 1 day, and that was it, which was about the human sciences, the humanities at Nanterre. And I think it was entirely made as a kind of preventive strike against Sarkozy's attempt to defund the humanities at Nanterre. So they wanted to beef it up before you just to make it more difficult for him to defund. I think it was kind of naive to think that it would have any effect, but nevertheless. And for whatever reason, I was asked to come to speak about American art history. I don't know why. They want to have anything about American art history. So anyway, I came, and I spoke about what had happened since this blackmail thing, and the blackmail movement in America at the time, which was basically the 80s. There was indeed, as Lisa said, this very big conflict between the social art historian and the formalist. And, there was this kind of, if you were attentive to form, you were this ugly soul to Das Kapital. You were basically paid by the CIA to, and if you were a social art historian from the point of view of you were like this idiot who just like look at the, if this painter father was a worker and there's a better painter, I mean, it's like, Jesus, that's what it was. It was like, the stupidity was extraordinary. And so, I was there like, please, can we speak about something else? Resist this attempt to put everyone into camps and things. So, and there was a demand. There was a demand from the point of view of students and because of the debate that you situate yourself, that you really, and I felt it was absolutely unbearable. And that has changed. That has really changed. In fact, you have Tim Clark being more formalist than Greenberg ever was, or even and you have, Tim came. I invited him to give a talk at Princeton. He spoke about about the allegories of love of Veronese in London at the National Gallery. I don't think he even mentioned the word Venice. I don't think he ever said the date. It was all about the difference, the shadow of the lens between the difference between that and Rembrandt. I mean, it's like, where? Where's the Marxist? It disappeared, completely vanished. And and many of them, myself included, we do a lot more contextual things than before. So it is all this thing is completely. I think the students after a while say, listen, we would like to look at works again. And can we just speak about can we just evacuate all this ideological positioning? Yeah. That's what it was. But it was a moment of demand, the demand of ideological it was clearly you had to do it, otherwise you were just like an awful perpetrator of the Das Kapital status quo.
So have we lost something today, not having the sharpness of those debates?
Well, it sharpened your muscles when you have to answer. But I don't know. I think that the return to the object was a good thing. It was also the moment where when I arrived in America, it was early 80s, the French theory, where everything was put in kind of big bags. So, like there were Barthes and Derrida and Kristeva and Lyotard and Foucault and Bourdieu and Althusser and as if all these people were having the same ideas, not realizing they didn't agree. They in fact very often disagreed majorly, but it was this kind of big bouillabaisse, and I couldn't stand it, really. So that was also part of the blackmail. Yeah. There was like, you have to have this kind of theory, and the theory was understood as a kind of, it's like it was basically a kind of ornament, and I always disliked theory as ornament. So that was part of the blackmail. Okay. That has really absolutely changed, I think. Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily have 5 quotes of Lacan and 10s of Kristeva and 20 millions of whatever in every single graduate student paper now. In fact, mine knew fairly quickly that it was not a good idea. Yeah. But I think it has changed. I think it has less intimidation, less. As I said, I have nothing against theory at all. I came from that, and it's not. But I have against theory, and I have something against theory as ornament. Yes, and, so that has changed, and radically changed, I think. To put that in context.
So one of the ambitions here is to think of painting as ReModel. So it takes us back to the title itself. Mm-hmm. And as Matthew remarked today, in one sense, the title just becomes an acknowledgement of Damisch. It takes its title from that review essay. And my first question would be, in one sense, rather than just simply seeing this as a sort of reflection of Damisch, what is the difference from Damisch that's important for you in that book? Because I think the title itself seems to seems to assume, I think, for certain readers, that it's just a continuation of Damisch, that you rethink thickness or something like that. And I'm interested, I think, first in what differentiates you from Damisch rather than being just an imitation of Damisch. Yeah?
What differentiates me from that, I don't know if I can say, but it's not for me to say. But it is the title, Painting as Model, which is, as you say, it's a title of a review of Damisch's book. The concept, the term model, which was fairly common in French theoretical discourse at the time, the way I use it and the way Damisch uses it, the way I use it comes from Damisch, and Damisch comes from Benveniste. And even though Damisch and I would disagree on that, on the way how to do it, but it comes from a necessity to combat Benveniste on one thing. We both loved Benveniste. He was like the preferred linguist you could read. He was just extraordinary. But he had this in his last text that he published before he became a phasic, which was in the first issue or second issue of the Semiotica, and it's called La Sémiologie de la Langue or something like that. He has this idea that language is the only system that is able to be the model for other systems and to have the capacity of interpreting other systems. And both of us, la relation modélisante, that was the Benveniste term, we both of us felt that's not true. The paintings analyze other painting, and paintings can be model for other things. So this is like we have to reclaim the term, the capacity to model for painting or for art in general. But it came from there. That's a genealogy of this concept. Now the term, the concept of model was here. Althusser's, students were using that all the time. In Badiou at the time, he was a teenager. He was,
Le concept de modèle.
Model and all these things, which I never understood that book, but that doesn't matter. I'm just full of mathematics. As soon as there's math in anything, it's just bye. And Lévi-Strauss, of course, had this whole idea of the model, the three-dimensional model to explain the, and he made model actual model to himself to understand the structure of myth and all that. So that's where it came from. That's this, obviously structuralist, but with specifically with the idea that we have to claim that painting can be a model against our beloved Benveniste's mistake, a logocentric mistake.
And if anybody came along and said, well, architecture can be a model, or that photography can be a model, that works.
That would have been, well, it would have been a different function. The photographic model is something that certainly helped Rosalind Krauss understand site specificity, understand many things. I mean, it's not photography per se, it's a model, which is great. She understood it through what became completely banal later on, the index and all that, but that was the photographic model. To say that Duchamp is entirely, related, conceived as under the aegis of the photographic model, it seems to be that changed the perception of Duchamp. Suddenly Duchamp became a very different figure after that was discussed.
So, because it raises the question that much of the ways of thinking about painting as model, and the word that comes up again and again and again, is that it allows us to understand painting specificity, or the word system is used today.
Well, I always sometimes attack because I use the word system. In fact, the reviews of recent works like this, blah blah blah. There's a long 5 or 6 page attack on my work in the New York Review of Books of last year or something, against the Kelly and against the big book on the big Matisse book for parts. One is system, so it's easy to make fun of the word. But I use system, as I said, and as you said, also just as kind of interlocated principles that are codependent, and so when one changes a bit, the other one has to change as well. But speaking about the book, the system, no, I just want to make a joke because I think I won't have the time to do it later. As my students gave me a kind of fake Festschrift for my 60th birthday, and one of them, Jules Litt, he wrote a text called Painting as Supermodel. Which I thought it was pretty good for Duchamp specialist.
But it's not Planet's system of painting.
No,
it's not.
Comment
Planet.
ça s'appelle le plan?
You know, he has a
Le système de la peinture.
Système de la
Yeah,
peinture,
yeah,
right.
But it's the only book in English, I think, of Planet's. It's translated as the system. of
yeah,
painting.
yeah.
Be to open it up to
Yeah,
other
yeah.
questions.
Come on, let's speak.
Can I ask a question? Hi. Is it
It is.
I've been really fascinated by the papers today, and my original training was as a psychologist, and I noticed that most of the theorizing in art sort of still stays within psychodynamic and psychoanalytic frameworks. And there's been quite a lot of progression since then in psychology about theoretical frameworks. For instance, cognitive behavior therapy, Seligman's positive psychology, which is very different, shall we say, to what was called the naive objective positivism. So I was just wondering why this is the case. Why are the frameworks still stuck within psychoanalysis?
Good. Well, you want to answer? Any answer? But were there a lot of things about psychoanalysis? Today, was there? I don't know. Didn't strike
I didn't
me.
hear enough. I didn't.
Huh?
Nothing. I don't think.
I didn't
That
hear.
kind of still around in the Anglo-American.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think generally continental thought though is quite psychoanalytic. Right? There's not like I'd say broadly. That's just an observation. I don't know why. I just say that's the case generally. Like not just art histories, anything in the continental kind of sphere, especially in the British humanities, is quite psychoanalytic still.
I'm hardly hearing you then.
I'm not saying anything insightful. I'm just saying that's generally the case. I don't think in the humanities, especially the continental humanities, it's quite psychoanalytic still.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Yeah.
What's not?
When it's humanities, it's moved on a lot.
I would say not so much. Not really. Like not in terms of. What do you mean by the humanities?
Psychology, sociology, anthropology.
The human science or
The human sciences, yeah. I don't mean the human sciences. I mean the humanities. I'd say like literature, art,
Yeah.
continental philosophy as well. Like the model is still psychoanalytic. I mean, to discuss why that is would would need another conference. Like,
Well, it's strange because in America certainly psychoanalytic disappeared from almost entirely, except in complete departments and art history.
Yeah.
It's
Many of you are talking about attention, gestalt therapy.
yeah.
The stuff that egomania. You've been talking a lot about psychological concepts, which.
But attention is not necessarily, and it was not done in a psychoanalytical way.
no, I didn't hear any psychoanalysis. Sorry.
I mean, I'm not sure this is really what you're looking for, but it seems to me within art history, art history sort of came to psychoanalysis through surrealism, right? And so there was this, people who were interested in that, read a lot of Freud, read a lot of Lacan, because he was in that mix, and I think it's hung around for a while as a result of that. But you're right, it's sort of anachronistic or anachronic anyway in that context, yeah.
I don't think we did that much either.
No,
I don't think there's any. I don't think.
Maybe, because my focus was on attentiveness, and there's obviously a neuropsychological sort of, reference pull that I'm making, which is contemporary and in terms of current research. But my sort of reading of the sort of psychoanalytical sort of residue is that art practice and painting in particular has a sort of weak spot for mystification. So it's something I think maybe gets caught in psychoanalysis in a sense, that profound pause, the complexity of that, which I'm certainly interested in refuting, I suppose, in a way. And having, gone to art college in the 90s, there was a lot of psychoanalytical sort of references that were getting sort of poured upon you, which didn't feel at all helpful. So I think that, paying attention to the object feels really important within that. And that's where my interest in attentiveness and attention comes in.
Maybe you can...
There's another question there.
I wanted to go back to blackmail again quickly, because I'm sort of extremely dissatisfied with your response that there are no existing blackmails currently.
Well, I didn't say there were none. I said that those have the ones I had to face are not threatening anymore.
I see. So it maybe would be interesting to hear what you or anyone else thinks are the existing blackmails
Of today?
Of today, but also
I can tell you about it.
just an extension from that, whether you consider something like auto-blackmail to be a condition of living and working within a culture over an extended period of time, that one might become blackmailed by one's own method or model.
Well, the auto-blackmail would be something close to self-censorship then, no?
Yeah, but it could, well, I would consciously, yes.
Well, one of the blackmails that we face in America, in the departments of artistry, let's say, on the field, is today, for example, if I would give a lecture on Mondrian, there would immediately be about 3 or 4 people say, why didn't you speak about the relationship between Mondrian and Bangladesh? Or why is not speaking about the fact that his pattern looks so much borrowed from Islamic patterns? Or what? There'll be that. That would be the, suddenly you have to connect instantly to the whole world. Otherwise you are a horrible, pedantic, white, imperialist moron. That's a type of blackmail that we have to see now. So, for example, in the field of artistry, the positions that are given in departments have to have this global angle. Otherwise, the departments don't get positions. They are like terminated. So, someone teaches 19th century French art, goes to retirement, and the replacement will have to be someone who is going to be able to speak about, global 19th century art, no matter what. And if unable to do that, you don't get the position. So that's a blackmail. Like it's going to be again bad to look at Cézanne because it's not global. So I don't have anything against globality, but I don't want it to prevent people from looking at Cézanne. So that's a typical type of institutional blackmail that you have in a discipline, and at the moment the global one is a kind of obligation. The blackmail it involves a kind of obligation to do something. You're obligated to quote Lacan, Derrida, Kristeva, blah 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 blah, and you kind of bouillabaisse. You are obligated to situate with what's a class position of the artist. That's what I call blackmail, and that they have changed. And at the moment, the global represents the major force of coercion. You have to do it, otherwise you are an awful reactionary, monster. Yeah. That's the current situation as I see it in America. I don't know at all the way it is here. But
in the introduction, you mentioned other unrecognized, the potential of other unrecognized blackmails that you haven't observed. And in hindsight, do you consider that there were others that you didn't list as one of your 7?
what? Sorry.
So in the introduction, you also mentioned, you caveat the fact that there may be other blackmails in operation.
Well, at the time, which was one I didn't suffer directly from, but I was conscious of it, and it kind of, because the book was published. It's a book I never liked, partly because it was done I was asked to put things together to get tenure. It's Michael Fried actually told me, you better do that fast, so okay. and so I never thought it was it only appeared now in French because I kind of didn't like it to appear in French. This is my fault. It's not. I never really thought it was a well made book, but so it was mainly. there was one text that was one or two texts that had been published when I was in French, and then there were others were written while I was in America, and my first text published in English was the one on Newman, written in English, edited by Michael, who was a wonderful editor, even though he disagreed with the text, but he was a good editor. Anyway, so it appeared at the end of the 80s, and at that time I was at Hopkins, and at Hopkins, let's say the feminist vanguard was not yet very powerful. Now, I arrived at Harvard, where there was the feminist patrol going to classes to hear what you had to say, so that was like people like but I didn't personally have to suffer at all about that. But it was also, I could have been told, why don't you speak? Why don't there no more female artists in this book? How is a scandal, male chauvinist pig, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't, nobody did. Nobody said that. But that was part of the, and I knew it existed, but because I had not been subjected to this obligation, I had not been, as other people would be a bit later, I knew it existed, and I didn't have the courage to mention something of which I had not been I had not been subjected. I was a little bit of a coward, but I think it was also, it's good I didn't, I think. So that was one of the occasions. But the demand for art to be political, the demand for this, there was like those demands that you had to do it, and Barthes in his inaugural lesson at the Collège de France got a lot of bad rap for having said that language is fascist, la langue est fasciste, because it's not it's what it forces you to say. And he got a lot of attacks from a lot of people, especially on the left, for having said something. But that's what blackmail is, when you're forced to do something by the structure of a particular context. And sorry, did I answer what you?
Thank you.
I don't want to be the only one to talk, though. I thought it was a round table, even though it's not round.
It's rectangular. Here at the center.
Sorry, this isn't, I can't formulate it into a question, but I wanted to ask something about the difficulty I find around painting contemporary art, is that it seems more and more fractured into an art rather than a part of art. The people that are involved in painting are specialists, and that becomes very fractured in its relation to other arts. So painting becomes an art rather than a part of contemporary art. I wondered if, sorry, I can't put it into the question, but I wanted to endlessly think about this thing about painting as an art rather than part of art more broadly. It seems to be a very specialist and specific subject.
Well, there was that David Josselin. He did that show that was about. It was. Yeah. So that was the opposite of that, wasn't it? Because it was all about expanded painting and that.
That was a theory, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah. I don't know. I don't have any thoughts on that really.
Well, he calls it network painting.
Network painting. Yeah, I didn't buy that either. But I thought that a lot of the paintings in that weren't like they weren't medium specific. They were by artists who do other stuff.
They were ostensible.
But a lot of artists paint and do other.
Canvas.
Yeah, but a lot of artists paint and do other things as well. Especially now, I think painting's getting more and more trendy now, and a lot of artists whose main practices might have been like video or otherwise like conceptual or installation, starting doing paintings now, especially in the younger generation. I find if you go to a degree show now, there's a lot of assemblage and painting, and a lot of bad painting, a lot of really bad painting. But it's like painting as one among many of bows, strings to their bow. Like surely it's more that's more of like an older idea that the painters are specialists. Like a pre 1950s idea. I don't know.
I think there is painting that sort of avoids discourse, maybe, that does withdraw from some of those conversations. And I suppose that's maybe a weird sort of offshoot. And then it's maybe how you consider what painting specificity might be, and seeing some of painting's concerns in, you know, in other art practices, you know, depending on your definition of what painting might be, or how far your idea of expansion might stretch. And I think painting needs to be in part of a wider conversation, as well as those moments of focus, you know.
I don't know what exactly you are referring to, but what I hear when I speak to friends who are painters in America, what I hear more and more is, because of the, you know, famous acceleration of the multiplication of images and the web culture, all this kind of thing, there's a clarification of a desire to point to what's specific to painting, what painting can do that other things can't. And there, you know, there are things that perceptual operations, let's say, that painting can do, and that no other form of visual form can. And I when discussing with you know, those friends, I pointed out an example, and they say, yes, that's what we mean, which was the example of ad Reinhardt. Like, ad Reinhardt cannot be reproduced. You know, I mean, late black. If you spend less than 10 minutes in front of a late black Reinhardt, you see nothing. So only painting can do that. You can't. There's no other mode of visual communication that could produce the same slowness. So it's one thing. That's one example. For example, what's specific to this particular strange art that whose death has been periodically announced every 25 years. So you know, I don't think people should worry too much about that. It's just like it's recurrent. But this is something that I think the kind of more pointed attention to what painting can do, which was already kind of like the medium specificity of the concept was already related to that, except that Greenberg never paid attention really to the medium, but contrary to what he said. Right. But that was already in there. But I think that the visual surproduction of today as forces people to be more pointed and more focused on, and it's more difficult, of course, when you are more pointed. But I think that's the situation today, because, you know, people do want to do painting, but they want to do something that is, you know, challenging and new and is not the repetition of the old forms. So.
Does it always rely on insisting that you go to the place that the painting is at? That sounds like what you're arguing there.
How are you meant to see the painting otherwise? On a screen?
Well,
in reproduction?
No, I agree that that's the way to see it.
Yeah.
But considering that that's not how people see art, day to day, we can see many things digitally. Painting ends up, like all other art forms, as a digital thing. That's how that's how the last 2 days have been. That's how we experience things. Do we consistently insist upon painting that you have to go to see it?
Well, you know, it's, if you see a slide of a painting, it's a sign of a painting, but it's not the painting. So, you know, if you go and see Bernini and you see photographs of, you know, the Daphne and in the Borghese Gallery, yeah, you see a photograph, but that has nothing to do with what experiencing about turning around the sculpture and seeing it in action. So, you know, I don't think that painting is that specific on that level, except that there's more, I think there's, you know, it's just not a, you know, well, it's specific in the sense that when you look at the painting, you don't look at an image of a painting, and that's a big difference. But I don't think it's you know, every time you see something in reproduction, there's a transformation and you know, a mediation, and in general a deperdition, but of which many artists have played. And I think Wall was certainly one that played the best.
But I think that maybe the result, so a totally different aspect, which is a bit, let's say, an alternative or contradictory with regard to this kind of, phenomenological apprehension of the painting question, which is of course coming from the 60s, yeah, the use, kind of subversive use of the painting made by pop art.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is also something extraordinarily important, which really, let's say, enlarged, let's say, intellectually, politically, philosophically, whatever, the understanding of painting, the historical understanding of painting.
It's a complete dialectic opposition between, from Warhol to Reinhardt. No wonder that Warhol, he didn't dislike Reinhardt. He disliked Warhol, but not as much. He said the corruption of the corrupt is fine.
Okay.
He hated Newman more, didn't he? His beef with Newman was more ferocious because he.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking about this idea of the necessity to go and see the painting. And then you can visualize a sort of, a journey to see the painting, this sort of communing with the painting. And actually, contemporary painting might ask you to see it, but it also does what painting has always done, is sort of resist being seen in some way, that it's sort of awkward or it takes time, and in that time you've lost the thing you saw to begin with and you're trying to catch hold of it. So yeah, that it does ask to be seen, but I don't like the thought of the journey to commune with it. And I'm remembering a student experience of fellow students sitting cross-legged in front of Rothko's and that sort of spiritual quest, and that's something which I think there is painting out there that is asking for that and asking for a non sort of conceptual engagement with that for something else, but actually a lot of contemporary painters are interested in resisting visibility, and partly that comes out of the contemporary, one hit and constant stream of image, and somehow being awkward in that, of being visible, but resisting it and making it apparent that there's a resistance because of its physicalness, I suppose.
Just to kind of add, it's something kind of really quite striking. For example, about kind of effects, say, sort of Google Images kind of has upon our perceptions of artwork. And if you sort of go back to, say, 1927, it had something like Sigrid Krakauer kind of writing in his essay Photography that we're now kind of inundated in photographs. This is 1927, and that to kind of think that we kind of know something because you have a photograph of that thing, you say, no, that's not it, that's just simply wrong. That it's kind of misnomer or misunderstanding of what the photograph is of. That comes from that. And it becomes interesting. So I have quite a few photography students. So in terms of research, I'm kind of somewhere between painting and photography half the time. And I'm saying to the students that the slides that I show on screen when I'm giving seminars, for about the first 8 weeks, the images you see are going to be 100 times bigger than what you actually see in the gallery space. Kind of the Man Ray photograph, which is kind of huge on the screen, is actually 5 inches, like 4 inches or whatever. And we're not going to get round to the Düsseldorf School of Photography, and I'm showing Gursky or Thomas Struth, all those kind of figures. The slide is going to be too small. And I say to them, please go and see the photographs, in a horrible phrase, in the flesh, so to speak. It's kind of go and see the photographs. I can't convey what the photographs are really doing kind of as slides, as projections. And I'm kind of interested in sort of saying, there's kind of a certain point in looking at the rise of Google Images, where you begin to increasingly recognise you can have a projection of a photograph, and you can have a photograph that convey the same visual information, but the object status of the photograph perhaps means something a bit more now. That photographs have a front and a back, as paintings do. They may be framed and so on and so forth. And that kind of physicality of the photograph, of the painting, maybe of the ceramic vessel, of sculpture. These are things we probably need to kind of, I'm not sure I want to say need to, but things that become interesting to us in a time of kind of hyper-image production that be consumed very, very quickly, and I think that becomes an interest to artists.
Well, there are a lot of artists who, well, not a lot, but with regard to the materiality of the photography, I was thinking of Tillmans, when he shows all his exhibitions are not extraordinary, not necessarily for the image per se, sometimes they are not that interesting, but certainly for the installation. I mean, he really tries to think about ways to showing photograph in order to, insisting of all the material properties and what it means to have big, small, frame, all kinds of. I mean, it's really quite. It changed the definition of what a photograph is, I think, just by his mode of installation.
Yeah, and Tillmans, I mean, by the way, because we are in London, produced the only exhibition which properly resisted to the Tate modern form.
Yeah.
I mean, it was absolutely amazing. He has been the only one able to do.
No, he's brilliant.
To propose a kind of, I mean, to enact a kind of alternative.
It's completely brilliant in solar.
Yeah.
That's really true. There was a question here.
Your mention of mathematics caused a little frisson, a kind of jollity, I think, amongst the assembled company. There's an interview by Gustave in which she asked Derrida something about the formalization of language as a non-expressive medium, and I was just wondering about the deployment, perhaps, of mathematics in the organization of pictorial space in painting as a possible counter to what you mentioned, Yves, as something like the imperialism of the logos. I wondered if you had anything to.
I have nothing to say about mathematics. I can't even count more than 3. So I always flunked every single math course I've ever went since kindergarten.
I've read it before, but my question is about that possibility of a mathematical system deployed in the organization of imperial space pictorial space as a counter to logocentrism.
Well, I don't know if it would be. Well, you could imagine a purely diagrammatical, mathematical thing that would be not logocentric. I think actually there are some remarks by Derrida about that, but he never went too much beyond the fairly.
I think the interview is Gustave is very most.
Yeah.
He writes very little about mathematics.
Yeah, very little. But he did think about the math diagram being. And you could imagine, and there are artists who have imagined the possibility of purely mathematizable art. I mean, the programmed art of Max Biel and Richard Polloz in Switzerland, and all the Groupe de Recherche d'Art Visuel at the beginning. There was an idea, but that didn't produce much. I mean, it kind of became rather sterile, rather fast. So.
I don't know if this is a response to the question, but I remember reading a proposal that Damisch put together for the Pompidou on abstraction.
Absolutely, yeah.
And which was refused, interestingly. Yeah. And I think in that proposal, Mondrian would. I remember, I think from memory, there was quite a large gesture to trying to think mathematics as a form of abstraction, and what brought all of these things together was a rigorous rethinking of abstraction. Yeah. And in fact, it leads me to a question, if you don't mind, to Yve-Alain about why abstraction.
Oh,
and because it's the key term for your subtitles, and my question is something like, what happened when you went from France to the States? Did the notion of abstraction stay the same? The term is not about style, it's not about a genre, it's not opposed to figuration. So what force for you, it's not Deleuze, it's not, there's a number of ways of thinking about abstraction, of which Damisch's, I think, proposal tried to do something. And yet in the book, it just seems obvious. Oh, Yves-Alain Bois writes about abstraction, right? You get that all the time, I'm sure.
Which is true.
But it seems to me that there's a way of trying to think about what that term is doing that maybe moves between different traditions, and maybe, I know during As painting, it functioned very in a very difficult way for us when we were trying to think about what French artists and American artists were doing and so on and so forth. It wasn't obvious that abstraction simply, it wasn't self-evident what abstraction is.
Well, I don't think I ever thought that I should define it. I always used the concept in a very pragmatic way, grouping things that were in artist production that were interesting me. I think that, the first artist I liked, the first was Mondrian, way before looking at Impressionism, all this stuff. The first, I just discovered Mondrian and fell completely in love and decided I wanted to become an artist, which I didn't do. But, so what it helped me understand, having this epiphany for Mondrian as a young teenager, what it helped me understand is certainly the distinction between meaning and reference. And one of the reasons I kept writing about abstraction is precisely because I was enormously irritated by the way people were writing about abstract art, always confusing the referent and the meaning. So either by saying people who attacked abstract art saying it has no meaning because it has no referent, or people saying it has a meaning because it has a referent, and finding the the stormy sky in a Kandinsky, or the subway. New York, the subway system in Mondrian's New York City, which was done by Bob Rosenblum in front of my very eyes, so which really was irritating. So I suppose that one of the reasons I kept writing about abstraction is because I felt that I could do a bit better than other people, and I could also write on Matisse if I wanted to, but So I don't think I ever felt the need to theorize the concept of abstraction. When I was working on Mondrian, I followed Mondrian's extremely, he's a terrible writer, but there's one thing that's very consistent in Mondrian is he differentiates between abstract, and abstraction from. It goes from, art is abstracted from, abstraction from and abstraction are two different things. And so the abstraction from is that you have a reference to the natural world and you gradually reduce to its essence. That's but purely abstract, as you would say, was something it is not a representation of an essence. It is not a representation of a concept. It's acting out of a concept, or the figuring, or the producing in paint of a concept. That's what he thought abstract. So I that's the only moment where trying to define what Mondrian was saying in his very convoluted languages where I defined it, I try to define, but once again it's very specific to Mondrian. I'm not saying that it should be the same definition for. I try to avoid kind of general definitions in general, and when I work I try to say, and some people have rightly, I think, criticizing me for staying often too close to what the artist has been writing. But, and sometimes I didn't. But it's true that I tend to read what artists write very very closely, and there's a danger in that, which in which, with regard to Matisse, it's a danger in which you almost immediately. You fall because he's so brilliant at describing. I don't know if he's one of the most brilliant writers on art. He really understood what he was doing, except when he was speaking about sculpture. Then he got it wrong. But it's very hard to write on Matisse without basically being ventriloqued by Matisse, and so it's very hard. So in the piece for that book, I decided, okay, since it's so hard, I'm going to do complete ventriloquy. I'm going to just choose all the statements that pertain to this issue of quantity, and then when you start looking for it, you find it everywhere. So, but so in general, I try to remain specific to when I write about Newman, I write about Newman and about a specific problem in Newman, and when I write about, that has always been my against system in a bad sense, against having a grand, a method that would, and a position that people say, well, why don't you, sometimes people thought I was like a militant for abstract art. No, I like VR just as much, just more. But some people can do VR much better than me. So.
Nick?
I wondered, the moment you went to the States, was what, late 70s, 80s?
83.
83.
I'd come to America for 1 year after high school, and then I came back to France and studied did my graduate studies and all that, and then came to America in 83.
I was just thinking, especially certainly with Danish, but the broader context of what you would have been exposed to in France when you were a student. You were studying at the same time where there was a slightly older generation who were pretty much reading very similar things. Danish was very interested in, well, it was very, Ponty was very important for him, obviously Rouen was important. And then Paynton's model, and obviously you were looking at Barret, you were writing about Martin Barret. Paynton's model, Matisse is in it, Rouen's in it by, Painting as a Task of Morning, it's really about Danish, it's not really about Rouen. I just wonder what's, so most of the artists are American, or there's Mondrian, there's Straczynski as well, there's a lot of American post-war art.
Not that much when you think about it.
Hang on, the question.
There's Newman and Ryman, that's it.
Yeah, true,
okay. There's more European than American in that book.
So question, what became of your relationship to that French context? What is it, or what happened with it? What did you think of it? What was it to you? I mean, you've painted, not the...
Yeah, well, I mean, I was a very close friend of Christian Bonnefoy and of Martin Barret, and I wrote a whole book on Martin Barret later on, when I was at the big book that I translated into English myself with a torture about, 10 years? 5 years ago? I forgot. I wrote that when I was at Harvard, so I wrote that in the 90s. Mm-hmm. I did not, lose all contact, but I didn't have as much contact as you think. I never met Antai. I didn't like Rouen personally, so that was it. I was close to a few people and some young painters too. But when you leave a country, you just kind of. So I would meet Christian, of course, and Martin every time I would come back to Paris, and a few other young artists of in the same group, but. I just kind of, I just lost contact, for the same, more or less. I mean, I still have contact with, not with Martin because he's dead, but I'm also helping his widow to do the catalogue raisonné of Barret. So, but I still have very good contacts with Christian and all that. So,
but wasn't there a moment where, I'm going back to Matthew's paper, where, you're close to Crimp, you're close to Bouclot, they're saying these things at the beginning of the 80s about painting. Was there any ever conversation with them saying, actually, you know what, I've got a bunch of people I know back in France who...
No, it was not that. It was not back in France. It was, you're wrong. I mean, I told Benjamin that his conception of history was so theological and so... I mean, at that time... In France, we had all kind of, studied very, very closely Benjamin's thesis of history, and which is completely impossible to make it coincide with Benjamin Bouclot's march. You can't do painting after Duchamp. You can, that goes like this, and so I remember saying that, and I remember telling Douglas Crimp, "You're wrong because that what you say is going to happen every 25 years." So it was not trying to bring my little French flag and say, "Oh yeah, no, it was not. I was never. It was never. It never entered my mind." But it was just like your theoretical position is just wrong, and it so happened that And I'm not saying that the French contest did not have a huge impact on me, because probably I was able to diagnose diagnosed this theoretical mistake because of the French context. But it was not. I didn't think about bringing it. My little, my little French.
So when you see things like support surface,
I never liked support surface.
Yeah, of course. But when you see that and young artists, not art historians in New York, picking up on support surface, that seems.
It's like one of those strange little things of history that always happen. This kind of returns, and fine, why not? Go and see. I mean, I think that I don't think that the cult for Lucan is going to last very long, but why not? I mean, try out, go and see. I don't think it's going to withstand more than a season of them. It's just the effects of the market. The market needs new things to new fuel, and so they try it. And I don't think it's going to. But it doesn't matter if the market is independent of critical discourse. So. No, it's why not? Go and see. I would not campaign against support surface.
Yes.
Good.
In fact, the daughter of Deleuze is an art historian in England, and she came to complain that I was always attacking support surface. So, attacking your father. I never attacked your father.
I think. One more question. Yeah. Last question, and then Mr. Broad.
One more very quick question. How do you find painting off the canvas feeding into the discussions today?
What?
Painting off the canvas, expanded painting. Because no one's spoken about, it's a very narrow definition of painting that you've been using today.
Oh, you mean if painting? Well, I don't have anything against painting off the. But give me an example of what you want to know.
An example of expanded painting.
Yeah. What do you?
Well, Duchamp regarded his ready-mades as paintings.
So, according to Thierry de Duve.
According to who?
According to Thierry de Duve.
Yeah.
That's
So
not
what do you
David
think of that?
Joslett or a few others.
I don't have I don't have any problem with that personally, but.
I mean, maybe one of the responses would come from Eric's paper today, where the complication of an inside and an outside is what displaces the notion of it expanded as simply what goes beyond the canvas. So there's a literal way of saying painting off the canvas, as if that's a sort of infinite expansion. You got Katerina Gross, I think somebody mentioned in the front here.
Yeah.
So you take it off the canvas and you put it across the wall, as if that's, and then the question would be, so what type of delimitation is in play there? It seemed to me Eric's paper today with the reading of Matisse, whether it be the window of Collioure or what was happening at the Barnes, would be about the continual displacements of simply having what's inside the painting and what's outside the painting. So the notion of the outside is already part of the inside, and it's a very complicated reading. I mean, you have to do a careful, close reading. It seems to me that and that with Katerina Gross, you have to think about what exactly is the delimitation of the space, because it doesn't just go off infinitely, it's still in a corner, it still has certain in-framing delimitations in some way. So the expansion of the expanded field is never simply a moving away from one thing, and a pure extensivity without intensivity, I think, in a Deleuzian terminology. And so I take it that part of the problem is not just saying, let's get off the tableau or the easel, which we're back with Greenberg again, but we have to think about how to think about that relation between an interiority and an exteriority. And that's a very different set of problems and initiatives. The concept of thickness is about this in one sense, than just, well, let's get rid of the easel, let's get rid of the stretcher and now make painting expansive.
You know, what you said reminds me of something that was a dialogue at the end of in the mid-70s. I don't know if there was a long interview of Bill Rubin, was then the Tsar of MoMA, and a very interesting long interview in Art Forum, where I think they gave the title of the interview. They gave as a title. They gave one of the things he said during the interview. It became the title of the whole thing, and I think it was, "The museum is not infinitely expendable," and it was proven wrong. A lot of the arts of the period was in fact directly trying to say we are trying to be outside the museum forever, but the museum just gobbled them up. So now most earthworks are now in collections of American museums and so forth. So the museum is actually, if the art can't go inside, the museum would go to it. So the expansion has only a limited power. But, I don't know if it is connected to what you had in mind, but.
So I'll just finish it then.
Okay, I'd like to draw things to a close and to really thank Yve-Alain tremendously for